for almost 5 days.
The banks have been closed for 8 days, but thanks to our brave young men, they've managed to reopen in an orderly fashion. And praise be to God, everything is moving along smoothly.
And while Benghazi's residents stock up at the supermarket, the power vacuum that was left in this city is being filled. The series of committees that are governing towns and cities in the east have appointed a leader. Mustafa Abdel-Jalil was Libya's former justice minister.
What is happening in Libya is a popular revolution led by the youth, supported by the people against oppression and against the dictator who has led Libya with a singular point of view and with a vengeful attitude and bloodthirsty soul. Now we announce to the world that we intend to build a democratic nation with institutions that respect international obligations and treaties.
The mainstay of Libya's economy, oil production, appears to be grinding to a halt. This refinery is pumping 11,000 barrels a day, almost a tenth of normal capacity, according to the manager. The site's expatriate workers have fled as Libya's uprising unfolds. Bernard Smith, Al Jazeera.
Hoda Abdulhamid is in the eastern city of Benghazi for us. Hoda, the former justice minister we saw in the report there, has formed a national council which is based in Benghazi. What is that? Is that going to be the face of the revolution?
Well, that's the hope, that it will become the face of the revolution. There is a understanding that all these different uprisings, as they call it, in the different cities that have been falling into the hands of the opposition now need to be concentrated under one umbrella, and the ex-justice minister is taking the lead in that movement. Now, the dynamic of it is that they have 5 representatives of each city or town that falls, and each time another city falls, then they immediately establish contacts to have that city or town join this national council. Now, they do say that they already have established contact inside Tripoli, people that are not going to come forward at the moment because of their security situation there, but certainly it is a big effort to try to really bring the entire country under this national council to sort of counter the government of Muammar Gaddafi. There is a feeling here in the east that if you just stay separated from the rest of the country, then it could soon look like a secessionist movement rather than an uprising. So I think this National Council is one way to counter that, and to counter the rhetoric coming out from Tripoli that this is just a movement the uprising is just something that could be isolated to the east of the country, a part of the country who's been always quite disadvantaged than the rest of the country under the 42 years of rule of Muammar Gaddafi.
But there is this issue over the cities which have fallen into protester hands, how long they can hold out. We've heard of AlJazeera and Misrata, which are apparently facing a possible onslaught from Gaddafi's forces. Is there a concern over the counter-offensive?
There's absolutely a concern over the counter-offensive, and wherever you go here in the east, people will tell you everything is possible. We try to prepare ourselves as much as possible, but at the end of the day, Gaddafi does have elite forces. Those elite forces are very well equipped and very well trained, much better than the army or the security forces. So a counter-offensive is something that does frighten people. Now, there is a feeling here in the east that at the moment they could be quite safe, because Gaddafi would be trying to get again or to win over again the western part of the country, as he has tribal allegiances in that side, much more than he has tribal allegiances here in the east. So he could find some support inside towns or cities in the west, more than he would likely to find it here in the east.
And just briefly, Hoda, I mean, what is life like there in Benghazi? Is there any sense of normality?
I think it's slowly coming back to normality, but very, very slowly, I have to underline. Now, over the past few days, I have been really traveling throughout the east. And at the moment, by and large, people are staying at home, schools are closed, and even though banks have reopened today for a few hours, some shops have reopened, you really do get a feeling that life is a bit at a standstill. Knowing exactly what will happen next, and there's a huge vacuum at the moment. I mean, all this has really taken people by surprise. Many actually can't really believe that they managed to defeat the pro-Gaddafi forces so quickly as they say. But on the other side, there's also no infrastructure here. They have no training here to deal with this kind of situation. There are no institutions on this side of the country. So it is a very, very delicate situation. There's still a lot of security issues that need to be dealt with. There's a lot of weapons in the hands of the civilians. All that are very big problems that could really tip over the situation quite quickly.
Hoda, thanks very much indeed for that. Hoda Abdul Hamid reporting live from Benghazi there. Well, the US Secretary of State Hillary Clinton says Washington is prepared to offer any kind of assistance to Libyans seeking to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi. John Terrett is in Washington, D.C. for us. John, it seems after an arguably slow start, the US is now going all out to topple Gaddafi.
Well, you know, Shuli, it's funny because the last couple of days have been pretty frantic here in the United States, what with the United Nations operating at the Security Council in the last couple of days and passing a resolution yesterday. Today in Washington, it's fairly quiet, but now the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, is flying north. She's in the air at the moment to Geneva in Switzerland, where she's going to attend meetings related to the United Nations Human Rights Council. And before leaving, and again on the plane, she has said today that the United States is reaching out to many different Libyans in the east of the country as the revolution moves westwards towards Tripoli. She said the US is offering any kind of assistance to Libyans who may wish to try to overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, but she did say it's too early to say how this is all going to play out. And her comments dovetail with comments from two very leading and senior senators here in the United States, both of whom are in Egypt at the moment and took part in Sunday broadcasts from there today. John McCain, our viewers will remember, challenged President Obama back in 2008 for the White House. He's there with Joe Lieberman, who's a senator from Connecticut and a hawkish independent member of the Senate. Both men calling for the immediate imposition of a no-fly zone over Libya, for the US government to immediately recognize the provisional government that is clearly forming now, as Hoda was saying, in Benghazi, the so-called National Council. And in Joe Lieberman's case, he called on the US government to consider arming members of the opposition in Libya, the better to overthrow Colonel Gaddafi. Shuli?
So she's off to Geneva to meet the UN Human Rights Council. What's she hoping to achieve there?
Well, she's flying there at the moment. The meetings take place on Monday. I think this is part of a multi-pronged effort from the United States government. We've already heard of the efforts going on in the east of the country, in Benghazi, that I was talking about just now. On Saturday in the United States, in New York, the Security Council produced sanctions against Libya, against the Gaddafi family when it comes to their finances and also their travel, and against the country as a whole. There is now a weapons ban, a sale of weapons ban against Libya. And now the Secretary of State is at the Human Rights Council. Now, it is interesting, the Human Rights Council took over in 2006 from the disgraced UN Human Rights Commission. And last year, Libya was elected in a move that raised a lot of eyebrows, almost unanimously, to the Council. I think what the Secretary of State is hoping to do is to try and see what movement they can get out of the Council in terms of putting pressure on Colonel Gaddafi. But then beyond that, and I think this is where diplomacy really works well, she will be face-to-face with very senior politicians the world over who will also be in Geneva, and they can have bilaterals behind closed doors to discuss the way ahead. Shuli?
John, thanks very much indeed for that. John Terrett in Washington, D.C. there. And the Emir of Qatar, from where we're now broadcasting, has spoken about the Libyan uprising. He's called on Gaddafi to stop the bloodshed. And while ruling out an intervention by other Arab nations, he urged the entire world to take a strong stance.
I believe when it comes to Europe and the whole world, against the background of revolutions taking place in the Arab world, we need clear-cut positions from the start. It is not acceptable for them to wait to see on whose side the balance will tip, then adopt a position. And what is feared in the Arab world that if certain dictatorship regimes manage to contain the situation, Europe will side with those regimes. Therefore, we always look forward to swift positions to be adopted. With regards to Libya and other Arab states seeing changes, I see that humanitarian aids and medical supplies must be dispatched. We must find access passages, whether through seaports or airports, especially that Europe can control air transport movements.
Now over to neighbouring Tunisia, where fresh violence has broken out on Sunday in the capital Tunis. Police fired tear gas and warning shots to disperse crowds on a third consecutive day of angry protests. 3 people have been killed and several others wounded in clashes between security forces and demonstrators since Friday. Well, the clashes happened as Mohamed Ghannouchi announced he's going to step down as Prime Minister. He had planned to guide the country to elections in July after President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali was deposed last month. Here's Ghannouchi's announcement on state television.
I decided to render my resignation. I decided to render my resignation as the Prime Minister, not to avoid the responsibility. I have shouldered the responsibility since January 14th till today. Since I have rendered my resignations and I'm no longer the Prime Minister, as citizens, I have a personal view. There is a revolution, and the revolution mandates that there must be a new constitution on the basis of which the country should move forward. And this is one of the most important matters which I consider as a citizen, that the constitution is important and necessary for us in order to elect a new parliament for Tunis.
Well, AlJazeera's Nazanin Mashiri has more from Tunisia.
Well, Prime Minister Mohamed Ghannouchi said he resigned to prevent any further bloodshed. But in Tunis, we are hearing of deaths, we are hearing of clashes between protesters and the police. This is a developing situation there. We've seen unprecedented protests, more than 100,000 people out on the streets on Friday. Protests outside the Prime Minister's office with people calling for his resignation, saying they will not back down until he goes. He has gone, but that doesn't seem to have stopped the momentum that we're seeing in Tunisia. People are angry not only at the fact that there are still remnants of Ben Ali's regime within the government, but also the fact that many of their problems and issues have not been dealt with, like unemployment and like investigations into the many deaths and injuries during these protests which led to the fall of Ben Ali.
Well, those revolts in North Africa have claimed a political scalp in France. So let's cross to Lauren Taylor, who's in our European News Centre for more on that. Lauren, what's the latest?
Yes, thanks, Julie. The French foreign minister has resigned following weeks of political upheaval. Michel Alliot-Marie was criticised for taking a vacation to Tunisia in December during the final weeks of the country's former regime. Andrew Potter reports.
A happy holiday in Tunisia for French Foreign Minister Michel Alliot-Marie. But the break she took in December and the last weeks of President Ben Ali's rule are unlikely to remain fond memories. Alliot-Marie's been forced to resign for this, the latest in a series of scandals she's been involved in. She's not the only French minister to take advantage of questionable free holidays. Prime Minister François Fillon took his family on a New Year's holiday to the Nile resort of Aswan, courtesy of Egypt's soon-to-be deposed President Hosni Mubarak. Alliot-Marie became pressured after it emerged she travelled to Tunisia on a private jet, owned by a businessman with alleged ties to Ben Ali, weeks before he was pushed from power. But with growing turmoil in the Middle East, the timing couldn't have been worse. Both politicians were hammered in the French press, which then took aim at an unpopular president.
It goes back a long time. It's not only Michel Alliot-Marie. The whole French foreign policy is in disarray, and we can date it to Nicolas Sarkozy's arrival to power.
Alliot-Marie is expected to be replaced by current Defence Minister Alain Juppé. He served as foreign minister before, in the mid-90s under Sarkozy's mentor Jacques Chirac. Sarkozy will be hoping the reshuffle will help stop the scandals which are severely damaging his chances of re-election next year. Andrew Potter, Al Jazeera.
Some more news from Libya now, and the British military has taken action to remove 150 of its citizens from the country. There'd been some criticism of the British government's failure to act quickly enough to rescue its citizens. But a mission in Libyan territory has now taken place without the agreement of Tripoli. Harry Smith has more on the operation.
British oil workers arriving in Malta